If everything can be paused, I will ask the spiritual court to put death on hold, so we can have time to breathe, and the rain of tears shall stop.
I have an appeal to the Supreme Court of Justice and Truth. Your mediation is necessary. Pause everything for a moment.
Honorable Deputy Speaker, the UDM supports Budget Vote 1. South Africa faces enormous socio-economic challenges: stubborn unemployment, deep poverty, rising inequality, and sluggish economic growth. Yet, despite these challenges, our economy remains one of the most developed and diversified on the continent. That reality makes South Africa a magnet for migrants seeking economic opportunities, including those who enter or remain in our country illegally. President, we want to make it categorically clear that on the issue of illegal immigration, we stand with South Africans who are calling for the lawful enforcement of our immigration laws.
Here is the leader, or one of the leaders of UDM. He has stated clearly that his political party stands with South Africans, not because we don't want other Africans, but the reason is that we have a problem. It's not only the problem of employment. That is why context is very important. It's the problem of security as well. Because right now we have a problem of human trafficking. We have a problem of people who are selling powder. And in most cases, the people who are allegedly involved in all these instances are people who are not documented. Before we can even talk about employment, we have to talk about the security. In other words, we have a problem of kidnappings, human trafficking, and so forth and so forth. So all these problems fall under the category of security. In other words, if you don't know how many people you have in your country, in other words, if you have a serious number of people who are not documented, then it means it increases the risk of crime. And if that crime happens, in other words, if the crime takes place through the people who are not legally documented, there's a high possibility that you may not be able to find those people. In other words, is the issue of security first, is the issue of the health, the mental health of the youth of South Africa. Because right now, many of them are the victims of drugs. And allegedly, in most instances, the people who are selling, who are distributing, are amongst those who are not documented. And even those who are documented, they are still involved. Yes, some South Africans are amongst the distributors as well. But when you check the stats, when it comes to those who are involved in the production of all these things, are those who are not documented, even if they are documented from other parts of Africa. And this is the problem. Before we can even talk about employment. And again, when it comes to this thing of like selling powder, we have a lot of people, again, who are also involved from Asian countries. They are also involved in all these things based on the information that we know, based on what we see on social media, and based on what we see as well on media. So we have a problem of security and the health of the youth of South Africa. So this is the real problem that South Africa is facing. But I've seen a lot of people on social media and they're like, now we have to vote for UDM. You need to be very careful. I always criticize politics because I believe that politics is the enemy of the people. Politics is the enemy of the people. We are where we are today is because of politics. It's because people have been voting using their own emotions. So sometimes even when politicians are right, we shouldn't be quick to say we have to vote for these people. They have to prove. They have to prove to you. In other words, they have to be fully convincing. If you still believe in politics and you are ready to vote, you have to make sure that if you do so, you use logic instead of using your own feelings. Because for the past 30 years, we've been using feelings to vote. That is why ANC is still in power. That is why ANC has majority of the votes, is because we use feelings instead of logic. And that's the problem. So it doesn't mean if a politician is right, then we have to just quickly follow them just like that. We have to verify, because you have to understand how the system works. We have to understand how the system works. They can try by all means to get our attention. They will try by all means to get our attention. But as far as I'm concerned, I can say I truly agree with the leader of UDM.
President, no country in the world is expected to simply look the other way when faced with illegal and undocumented migration. No country is told that enforcing its laws is somewhat immoral. Yet,
that's true. If you visit China, you have to abide by the rules and regulations of China. You have to respect their constitution. You have to respect their laws. You have to respect how they do business. If you go to Russia, you have to, for an example, follow the rules and regulations. You have to respect the constitution of the country. In other words, I use these countries as an example because I know many Africans are in love with these countries, such as China, probably North Korea, Russia, and few others. But the most important thing is that even if you decide to go and live in those countries, you will have to, for an example, respect their constitution. So today, the constitution of South Africa is not respected is because we have a problem of unethical employees when it comes to government sector. In these government departments, we have a problem of unethical business owners who are also taking advantage of what is happening. And again, we have a problem of unethical, just the members of the society who are unethical. In other words, who can accept bribes anyhow and any day. This is the problem that we have. That is why we are where we are today. It's because of these people who do not respect the constitution. We have a problem of scamming politicians. They come to us promising us heaven and earth, telling us that we are lying. Today they say this, tomorrow they change their story. So that is why in most cases, politicians cannot be trusted. Sometimes even when they are right, don't be quick to say we have to vote for these people. You shouldn't be quick to say so. Because in most instances, some of them can change. And we have to understand that the system will try by all means to capitalize so that they can get our attention. That is why sometimes they can even use people who are radical. We can even think and say, you know, this person is radical. This person can be trusted. Just because we don't know, all of a sudden, these people are used by the very same system, by the very same enemy of the people. We need to be very careful all the time.
South Africa, whenever the issue is raised, we're immediately subjected to lectures, labels, and moral grandstanding. South Africans are told that they must not complain, they must not ask questions. They must not expect their laws to be enforced. They must simply absorb the consequences and remain silent. What is even more remarkable, President, is the persistent attempt to reduce this complex issue to race. We are constantly told by those who are intellectually lazy that white undocumented foreigners are not targeted. Well, if they were competing for jobs in Gugulethu, in Tanzania.
This is what a lot of people are saying on social media. This is what a lot of people are saying in social media. But as for me, I can say I'm not standing with other people from other races, because people who are affected here are Bantu people. Bantu people here in South Africa are affected by what is happening, are affected because their children are consuming powder. In other words, their children are not safe because of human trafficking, because of kidnappings, because of food poisoning, because of most of these things. They are not safe. It's them who are affected. So that is why I'm not like, for an example, expecting other people from other races to intervene or to support Bantu. I'm not expecting that. I'm not expecting that. The reason I'm not expecting that is because I know that everybody is benefiting. Everybody is benefiting. As long as there's lawlessness, these companies are benefiting. In other words, by not following the Constitution of South Africa, they also benefit. A lot of farmers are also benefiting. In other words, most of these people are benefiting. So that is why I'm not expecting people of other races to intervene or to help Bantu people to say, you know what, we understand what is happening. I'm not expecting that at all. But the other thing that I would like to talk about is that we are affected in our communities. That is why we have to get rid of all these things in our communities, so that at least they can affect those who are living in suburbs, those who are living in expensive places. This is my position, because those who are rich, especially from other races, they cannot sympathize with us. They cannot sympathize with us because this whole thing is a mission. To destroy us is the mission. So the reason we are concerned about what is happening, this is a sign. This is a sign that we are the originals of this land. We are the originals of this land. So we cannot expect other people to help us when, on the other hand, they also have their own intentions. In other words, because their focus is on profit. So they don't care what is happening.
In Kaili, Chakwamashu, and Soweto, if they were concentrated in township economies, petrol stations, restaurants, and informal businesses, if they were directly competing for some opportunities and limited resources that millions of poor South Africans rely on, they too would be part of this debate. The reality is that the issue is not primarily about race, it's about economics, it's about opportunity, unemployment, competition for scarce resources. Pretending otherwise may be politically convenient for some, but it does nothing to address the legitimate concerns of South Africans who live with these realities on a daily basis. But apparently pointing out this obvious fact has somehow become controversial. President, we are also Pan-Africanists, but we are not naive. We reject this term of version.
Let me just talk about Pan-Africanism for a moment. I don't call myself a Pan-Africanist, but probably through my character and my experiences and what I've done in the past and what I'm doing right now, I can be regarded as a Pan-Africanist. But I don't regard myself as one, or I don't call myself a Pan-Africanist. But here's the thing. Accountability is very important. When your brother is offending you, you have to tell your brother his offense. You have to tell your brother his offense. You have to educate your brother. You have to educate your sister. You have to teach them about sustainability, about independence, about love. You have to teach them about all these things. In other words, you have to teach them about business implementation. You have to help them to fight their struggles as well. So Pan-Africanism has not progressed. Has not progressed. A lot of people who call themselves Pan-Africanists, they still say all these things that were once said by the likes of Marcus Garvey and many others. And many others. So there was a time when, in other words, there was a time period when Marcus Garvey lived and other Pan-Africanists. So as time progresses, we have to see new Pan-Africanists coming up with a certain strategy, a strategy of implementing, because this is the time that we were given to do what? To implement those strategies that were communicated by people like Marcus Garvey. But instead, we want to repeat what they were saying. We want to keep on repeating what they were saying. It's important, but we have to implement. We have to implement. We have to educate one another. We have to, like, for an example, teach people about how can we sustain ourselves without depending on or upon European economy. We have to teach ourselves that. But the problem is that most of these Pan-Africanists are controlled by the very same colonizer, by the very same oppressor. This is the problem. That is why Pan-Africanism is not respected. That is why it's not like progressing, because everybody is a Pan-Africanist. But they accept all these cultures. They accept all these traditions, and they also get bribed as well. Yet they call themselves Pan-Africanists. How can you be a Pan-Africanist, but you are still controlled by your enemy? You are still controlled by the colonizer, yet you call yourself Pan-Africanist. It should not be like that. So most of these people who are in parliament, they call themselves Pan-Africanists. In other words, they associate themselves with Pan-Africanism. You go to Africa, you go to all these countries here in Africa, all of them are associated with Pan-Africanism. But what have they done? What have they done for their own people? They are serving the colonizer. They are the puppets. They get controlled by the colonizer. They are not doing anything to solve the issues, the problems of tribalism, the problems of wars here in Africa. But instead of doing so, they perpetrate. Yet they call themselves Pan-Africanists. That is why Pan-Africanism will no longer be respected. Especially these days, it doesn't have that strength anymore like it used to. You know why? It's because there are many people who call themselves Pan-Africanists when in reality they are not. It's many of them. It's many of them. So you should never be surprised when everybody in a South African parliament is a Pan-Africanist. You should not. In other words, you should not be surprised. You should not be surprised when your councillor, when your mayor, when your governor, when your minister regards himself or herself as a Pan-Africanist. When the roads are full of potholes, when there's a problem of electricity, when their leaders are controlled by the outsiders, when they disappear one another, then you ask yourself, where is Pan-Africanism here? Because whenever there's a Pan-Africanism conference or something like that, they are always there. They are always invited. All these mayors, all these governors, all these ministers, all these politicians. Then you ask yourself, why Africa is like this when everybody is a Pan-Africanist? That is why Pan-Africanism has poor quality, has low quality. Nobody is interested in something that has low value or low quality. And that's Pan-Africanism. That's Pan-African. Why? Because they don't have time to hold one another accountable. Because if these leaders were real Pan-Africanists, they would come together and say we need to hold one another accountable. And that process would quickly, like for an example, accelerate the process of uniting Africa. Right now, this thing of uniting Africa is just a dream. It's not even close to being fulfilled. Why? It's because we are full of people who are greedy. We have a problem of greedy leaders who don't care, who don't like their own people. That is why at the end of the day, their people will have to move from their countries in numbers and go somewhere and go to Europe and stay there. When you ask them if they want to go back to their countries one day, They'll tell you no, most of them. Why? Because it's bad in their countries. Because they don't want to hold one another accountable. They don't want to tell each other truth. That is why right now it's easy to say that in South Africa there's a problem of xenophobia. But these people, they don't want to take time to understand the real issues practically. Come to our societies, come to the townships and see what is happening. We have a problem of Pan-Africanism.
Of Pan-Africanism that appears only when South Africa is expected to make sacrifices. We're told that South Africans must carry the burden of poor leadership and governance failures elsewhere on the continent. We're told that South Africans must never complain. We're told that South Africans must never ask difficult questions. I therefore want to ask a number of questions which are important. Where is this Pan-Africanism when African leaders are bought by the West and Morocco to vote against African interests in international forums such as the IPU? Where is this Pan-Africanism when South Africa came under fire, under sustained verbal attacks from the US during your G20 presidency? Lastly, and perhaps more importantly, where was Pan-Africanism when 14 South African soldiers paid with their lives in pursuit of peace and stability on the continent, 14 lives lost, families shattered, coffins draped in South African flag? What happened afterwards? The DRC and the US signed agreements giving American companies priority access to the DRC's mineral wealth. America secured the deal. We buried our soldiers.
That's true. I agree with him. I agree with him. Pan-Africanism is always losing. Why Pan-Africanism is losing is because people who call themselves Pan-Africanists, many of them are puppets, are chameleons. They change all the time. They cannot be trusted. They are not trustworthy. They don't want to be held accountable. They hate the truth. Yet they call themselves Pan-Africanists. These people call themselves Pan-Africanists. Yet they don't like Ibrahim Traore. They don't like General Chiani. They don't like General Goita. You ask yourself, why? Yet they call themselves Pan-Africanists. It's because most of these people are just wolves. These people are just scammers. They scam people in the name of Pan-Africanism. It's like those pastors who scam people in the name of going to heaven, or who scam people like in the name of preaching beautiful sermons. They are not different. Pan-Africanists are like that. Most of them, not all of them, but most of them, they don't care. They still like the colonizers' cultures and traditions and everything. They are controlled by the colonizer. They bow down to the colonizer. They send the minerals of their countries daily to the colonizer. Yet their children are starving. They don't care. So the way they are accusing South Africa right now, they should be using the very same energy to say, let's come together and accelerate the true unity of Africa. the true unity of Africa, which will not put South Africa under pressure. In other words, which will keep all these countries balanced. But because they don't like holding one another accountable, because they don't like the truth, because they love power, positions, more than their own people, more than African unity, they don't care. They are just ready to say, let's criticize. They don't have facts. They don't have anything. In other words, they want us to, like for an example, believe in the very same propaganda they used to criticize. Because when the propaganda is against them, they are the first one to criticize. But when they force us to believe the propaganda that there's xenophobia here in South Africa, they want everybody to believe that. So the very same people who always criticize media are the very same people who use media as well for their own benefit. When it comes to Africa here, Pan-Africanism is always losing. Western countries are always winning because their target is the minerals. They want the minerals. So you have to understand that they don't care. Even if it's at the expense of dividing the people, they don't care because they've been doing this for over 400 years. This is what they've been doing. To divide and rule. To divide and rule. So if you are a puppet of such people, then you are not going anywhere. You cannot be trusted. You cannot be trustworthy. That is why it's important for people to use their own minds. You see, if you disagree with me based on your own mind, your own analysis, that are not influenced by anyone, I respect it. I respect it. But we should not, like for an example, disagree, or I should not like use somebody else's analysis to disagree with you just because I love that politician. I love their analysis. So I have to like adopt those analysis and like disagree with you. Sometimes it will take a long time for me to realize that I was actually wrong. So that is why it is important when you receive the information, you have to analyze it. You have to use your own brain. You have to use your own mind to digest and analyze the information before you can say there's xenophobia. For an example, if politicians say there's xenophobia, you have to analyze it. You have to, if you are, for an example, you are a South African, you're staying in townships, just analyze everything. When they say you are lazy or your people are lazy, just sit down, analyze everything before you can agree with the politician. There's absolutely nothing wrong to agree with the politician. When someone is right, you can agree with them. Like for example, I'm like, we have to agree with this, or me personally, I agree with the leader of UDM. But I disagree with people who say now we have to vote for UDM. This is where we need to use logic again to say we shouldn't be quick. Because you have to understand that the system is always thirsty for our attention. They want to control us. In other words, they want to control us like water or something like that. I don't know. But they want to control us like that. They want to test that if we are moving towards left, then they can control us. If we move towards right, they can also do the same. If we go forward, if we go backwards, they can also be in control of us. So that is why we need to be ready all the time to use our own logic. We have to know that from 1994 until now, there are many politicians who spoke good words, beautiful words from African National Congress. But look where we are right now. You can agree with someone, but it doesn't mean you have to just rush to give them your vote.
Too often, solidarity is demanded from South Africa but barely reciprocated. Solidarity, President, without reciprocity is exploitation. Partnership without mutual benefit is dependency. And the Pan-Africanism without accountability is a scam and merely a slogan, and we reject it with the contempt it deserves. We therefore support the enforcement of South Africa's immigration laws. At the same time, we reject violence, intimidation, and attacks against foreign nationals. The rule of law must prevail.
Mangawudlulisa nje lo mlayeza ngalendlela ngathi einkundleni zokuxhumana siyabona vele ukuthi baningi abantu abathi kumele ukuthi siseke iUDM noma sivotele iUDM. Kodwa ke kubalekile ukuthi siqaphele ukuthi osopolitiki bayisitha kubantu. Simbonile uKhongolose 30 years yonke akenzanga lutho. Abantu basahlupheka kuze kube imanje. Yingakho ngithi lempi yimpi yabantu. Singalindeli ukuthi ezinye inhlaka kumele ukuthi zisincede ukulwa nalempi. Ngoba masikhuluma ngedakamizwa zilahlala khona. Masikhuluma ngabantu abangasebenzi kusendaweni zethu. Masikhuluma ngabantu ababulalana bodwa noma ubugebengu kusendaweni zethu. Kubalekile ukuthi ngaso sonke isikhathi singalawulwa imizwa. Kodwa into sibuye siyicabangisise. Asingabavotelini labantu. Labantu bayingozi. Ngamagama kumele ukuthi basikhombise ukuthi ngempela banentshisekelo yokwenza lento efunwa abantu. Ngoba ekukhulumeni iqiniso ezinye inhlaka ziyazuza kulento. Ziyazuza kulento. Amabhizinisi wabo ayazuza ngamagama athola imali eningi, athola iprofit eningi. Ngamagama kubalekile ukuthi uma uvota ungasebenzisi imizwa yakho. Ngoba mina nje empilweni yami ngaba nombono ukuthi ipolitiki iyisitha. Yingakho esikhathini esiningi ngigxeka. Kodwa ke mangabe kuukuthi usakholelwa ekutheni osopolitiki bangenza kangcono, abangisisa kuqala ngaphambi kokuba ubanike ivote lakho. Kubalekile lokho.
If everything can be paused, I will ask the spiritual court to put death on hold so we can have time to breathe, and the rain of tears shall stop.
I have an appeal to the Supreme Court of Justice and Truth. Your mediation is necessary. Pause everything for a moment.